Good afternoon from Washington, D.C. Once again, my name is Harry Kazianis. I'm Director of Defense Studies here at the Center for the National Interest. We are the publisher of the National Interest magazine. That's where you're picking us up, either on Facebook Live. We're also recording this on YouTube now as well, so you've got two different ways to actually interact with me and Danny. Once again, joined by Danny Davis. He is a senior fellow at Defense Priorities, does a lot of great work on the national interest, a lot of great work on Army reform, Iraq, Afghanistan, the Middle East, you name it, Danny does it. But we're here today to talk about a couple different things. At the moment, Danny, we don't have a massively breaking news item like we have in the last couple days.
It's been kind of rare, almost.
Yeah. Does it seem like war is going to break out in the Korean Peninsula? At least not yet. Where it seems like things in Syria, at least from a great power perspective, have sort of calmed down a little bit, at least. So I think today we're going to talk a little bit about the latest happenings on North Korea. Certainly some things that are happening that are very sad and very tragic. We're going to get to those, and then we're going to talk about possibly the different rumors and things that are going on with the next possible Secretary of the Army.
Right.
So latest on North Korea. Over the weekend, as I'm sure you've seen, another American was basically taken captive. It seems like we have a trend basically that's happening where there's tourism that's been happening where people from the West and other countries would go to North Korea. The North Koreans would take them on tours through Pyongyang and show them the fake shops that nobody buys anything from, and the eateries and computer labs that really nobody uses except the party privileged and those type of things. But it seems like when people are trying to get out of the country, the North Koreans are basically grabbing people and saying, "Oh, you spied on people in North Korea and whatnot." So, what's your reaction? What do you think about that?
This sounds a little bit like what Saddam Hussein did in the lead up to the Desert Storm.
Yes, I forgot about that.
They had several.
That's right.
They were protecting Americans. You remember the famous scene of him with the child,
the creepy little boy. Yes, creepy.
I think that they're probably keeping them somewhere, and I would wager that diplomatically they're conveying that we've got them in this place that you probably have crosshairs on, that if you try to bomb something, you'll be bombing your own people.
Yeah.
I really think something like that's going on. There may be other reasons why, but I think that they're using that. So if we do anything, even if we didn't hit them, they would say, "Oh, you killed them, and look, here's what you did." So,
right.
Kind of as a small insurance policy.
Right, and the interesting thing is and maybe I've missed this, and maybe you've seen this, Danny. I'm not sure, but the administration hasn't said much about it. I haven't seen any statements from the Trump administration or the White House state. Have you? Or
no, and I think that's by design. I think what they don't want to hand any political or public relations victories to Pyongyang. So I don't think that they'd want to talk it. They don't want to make it look like we're negotiating whatever. So I think that you're going to see this kept low, and it also wouldn't surprise me to see that they reached out to some of the media and said, "Hey, y'all keep this low on the radar so that we can negotiate their return without complicating matters."
Right, because that would be 4 Americans that are actually in North Korea right now. I believe 2 of them have already been sentenced to hard labor and potentially prison camps and those type of things. And we've talked about this on this Facebook Live channel and now YouTube channel, some of the horrific things of what people encounter in those prison camps.
Yeah, it's just it's in some respects it's not unlike some of the things we saw in World War II with the Nazis.
Yeah.
It's just hard to believe that thing still happens today.
Yeah. So just moving on from that for a second. So there's been a lot of talk when we talk about the North Korea issue about where does the Trump administration go from here? Because we have to keep in mind, in the Asia Pacific, there are multiple different pressure points between the United States and China.
Right.
Not only do we have the tensions in the Korean Peninsula, but we also have challenges in the East China Sea between China and Japan. We also have the massive situation of the South China Sea. We also have tensions over Taiwan. And there's some interesting articles. I think Josh Rogan had one today in the Washington Post and some others that basically talk about, and I think alluding to the fact, how much is the administration sort of willing to give up or barter or trade away on some of these other issues to try and quote-unquote settle the North Korea problem. What is your reaction, Danny? Do you think that it's wise for the administration to maybe make some trade-offs or maybe apply less pressure in some areas on, in order to get more help on North Korea? What's your take?
Yeah, I think it's absolutely necessary. I hope that's what's going on.
Okay.
Because, like we've talked about in the context of several other things, the American objective has to be stability in the Asia-Pacific region. Keep the shipping lanes open. keep free trade, flowing back and forth, and certainly prevent the outbreak of any kind of conflict over there, because that goes against our interest in everything. So I think some give and take is necessary. I think one of our big problems that we've had over the last couple of decades, even certainly over the previous two administrations, is this, frankly, arrogant unwillingness to compromise on anything. We want, here's our list of demands, give it to us, and who's going to respond to that?
Right.
So I think that if we're willing to have some give and take, and certainly we have areas where we can only give so far, and then we'll stand firm, and we should. We have some principles that, like, this is a non-negotiable matter for us, and we'll tell them that privately. But this one's a little bit more gray here, and it's not going to cause us any problems to do here. So it's I think it's statecraft. I think that's diplomacy, where something can be a win-win. It doesn't have to be, all right, I'm getting everything I want, and you're just going to do it, because they won't, and then we don't even end up with what we could get.
Right.
So I hope that's what's going on.
Okay. All right. Let's move on to something that broke late Friday night. So there's been a lot of talk and speculation about the next Secretary of the Army. There's been some interesting scuttlebutt. I think you could probably talk about more than I can. That there was a nominee that was actually, there was the second nominee that was declared. I don't think it actually went up to the Hill, but I guess there was some offhand comments, I think, that were made by the nominee, and that fell apart. Why don't you kind of give us an update on where that stands, Danny?
That's I believe it's Military Times Today, or one of the YouTube channels, I can't remember, actually had some of the video.
Oh, wow.
of Mr. Green making some of his statements. So I've seen comments before, but I'd never seen the video, and I'm like, wow, that's not going to be helpful. And you can kind of understand a little bit, especially in this explosive world where LGBT rights and
that was what he was
and
commenting
all that
on.
Kind of thing. Yeah. They're so hypersensitive,
right.
And so. And it was, the comments just should never have been made. And whatever he may believe, you should never make those kind of comments in public. And you can kind of see to where somebody would say, well, if you'll make those comments in public, then it must be something you would considerably act on, whatever. So I can understand. He may have been a really good nominee. We won't find out. But I will tell you that before they select someone else, I think we need to get out of where we have been with political appointees for a while, which is somebody that they helped out the campaign, they are friends with somebody, and they can maybe do an adequate job. We need somebody who's highly qualified to do this job. I believe if the administration goes out there and finds someone who understands the combat environment, he understands the tactical environment that we operate in on the strategic level, understands how the Army works, knows how to get around the Pentagon, understands how business works, and understands how things work on the Hill. And that's a big skill set, but I think it's necessary. And there's certainly a lot of people who have the quality to do that. But we need to find somebody like that, because the Army, I mean, my goodness, you've seen the testimony of several of the service chiefs recently, especially the Army, that we're in a serious readiness crisis.
Right.
I mean, the Vice Chief of Staff of the Army in February testified that if a situation broke out tonight, on a certain lake, there would only be 3 of 55 brigade combat teams ready to respond. Only 3.
Why has that happened, Danny? Is it just because of sequestration?
No,
because I can't.
No.
I mean, look, I understand that sequestration obviously did a lot of damage. I mean, when you cut military forces with an axe instead of a scalpel, obviously that's going to create problems. I get that. But what has led to this? Educate me.
Yeah, let me tell you what it has led to. And I believe it was General Allen, the Vice Chief, that said 15 years of contingency operations have really degraded us.
Okay.
So you can say that sequestration played a role, and I'll agree, but I'll agree that it played a role only, and it was not the driver. The driver has been our foreign policy, because as I think almost all the service chiefs or all the Army chiefs say when they testify, the United States has, I think it's like 120,000 troops deployed in 140 countries around the world. We don't need to do that. That's not in our national interest. It's not keeping safe. It's not preventing wars. I mean, look at all the wars we got. Clearly, it's not preventing wars. Right. But when we use the military all over the place, when we send troops into Libya, into Somalia, into Syria, into Iraq, more back into Afghanistan. Where does it all stop?
Right.
And so when you keep using them like that, you keep wearing them out, and of course that's expensive. So even with the the OCO, the Contingency Operations Fund, that's not enough. And so you burn out the equipment faster, you burn out the people, and the opportunity cost is critical, which is that we're not able to train for the existential fights, potentially against like a Russia, a North Korea, or a China. God forbid that any of those should happen. But if they do, we're not ready for that. That's why we need a Secretary of the Army who understands strategy and understands all those other things that come in and say, all right, we're going to fix this mess. And so we're going to reorganize. We're going to reform how we do business. We're going to do the acquisition a lot better, which has been a complete disaster. And then, of course, the Secretary of the Army doesn't set national policy, but he can, hopefully lobby some of the policymakers that, hey, we need to think carefully about this because here's the cost of it. Because that's what's been missing so far is that the Hill says something, the president says something, and they just do it. Well, there needs to be a little bit more explanation of the opportunity cost. All right, I can do this, but if I do this, I can't do this, and we'll not be able to do enough of this because here's the budget, and I've got to work within the budget that you've given me. Now, if this is a problem for you, then you either need to give me a bigger budget, or you need to change the policy. And some of these things can't be fixed with money. You can't fix the training issue with money when you're using the force all over these places, because then they're not available to train for the potential existential fights. I mean, you just can't. It's a zero-sum deal, no matter what the budget is. So that's why it is really important that now, from any time, you have the Secretary of the Army has high qualifications, and obviously somebody that can get confirmed. But we need somebody with the qualifications much more than just a political background.
Okay. Put you on the spot slightly. If you were to be the next Secretary of the Army, what three things would you change? Give me your top three. What three things would you go to the president and say, Mr. President, these three things need to be addressed immediately? What would they be?
Well, I would first of all say that the way we are organized for combat needs to fight.
Okay.
That needs to change
because
we're still organized as we were for the most part in 1942 in World War II. We changed a handful of times, but it's just tinkering around the edges. There are some new ways to fight, some new paradigms that you can use with new technology that can advance the way we fight, that can make us actually more combat power with less money. So that's the first thing that I would do. The second thing is the personnel system needs to change because it's still grounded in even the World War II, in the Cold War primarily, and there just hasn't been any changes. And we have too many general officers. There's been a lot of things about the officer bloat, and the ratio's like 5 or 6 times higher for a general officer towards a troop as it was in World War II when we actually were fighting global conflicts. So that kind of thing needs to be rearranged because the last thing is we need to flatten the levels of command because of technology and training. You don't need to operate a brigade. You don't need like a division headquarters, a corps headquarters, the theater operations headquarters. There's 4 levels of headquarters before you even get to the battalions that operate, and that's just unnecessary.
Yeah.
So you can literally take one of those. You can take the division out completely, or you can take that 3-star out completely and use the 4-star and maybe the 2-star, but one of them has to go because it's bloat and it slows process down, and we're just not training the way we need to fight.
Okay. Last question. This won't be a little in the weeds, but I think you can answer it. Are our tanks too old? Our national interest readers are constantly debating about the M1 Abrams tank and some of the upgrades that have been proposed that could get it to maybe the 2020s or beyond. Is that something we need to upgrade? Are we competitive with like the Russia Armada tank that's coming out and the T-90s and the Chinese have a new tank? Where do you stand on that?
Yeah, I was actually an armor officer. So I went to Desert Storm with an armor unit. I was the second in command of an armored cavalry squadron. So I have a lot of experience with the tanks.
Sure.
We have made substantial upgrades since Desert Storm, especially. I think it's like the M1A2, the M1A2 SEP, several different iterations, and those are great. But I think that we have just about maxed out how you can improve that.
Okay.
We tried that with the FCS, and it was a failure for many reasons. But you see, the Russians actually succeeded where we failed, and they have the Armada system, which has the same chassis that's used on a number of different ones, and it uses complete new technology. we need a new engine. We don't need to use the same turbine engine that we've literally been using since Desert Storm. There are, hybrid versions. There's a lot of different things. But instead of just tinkering around with this one, I think we need to develop something new, but we need to do a lot better than all the other times we've tried. But I think we've about maxed out here. And if we don't come up with something new, then because of the Armada, because of some others in Europe Eastern Europe, and certainly in China, the edge is almost gone already, and we don't want to get into a situation where somebody comes up with new technology that actually exceeds what we have.
Yeah, they were behind because the M1 was developed, in the 1970s?
1970s, yeah.
Yeah, and deployed in 79. Well, I think we're going to leave it there. We went a little off topic, but I think it was worth our while, so that was great. Again, I'm here with Danny Davis. He's a senior fellow at Defense Priorities. My name is Harry Kazianis from the Center for the National Interest. We'll see you soon.